Welcome everyone to part 2 of our Indie Dev Spotlight recap for the month of February 2020. As always, all the games you're seeing have been played with press keys provided by a developer and as a way of showcasing either up-and-coming or smaller indie games to give them some free coverage. You'll find links to all the games in the description down below, and if you'd like to submit a game for an upcoming spotlight, please don't hesitate to get in touch. For our first game, we are going to be taking a look at Metal Unit. This is from the same publisher as Skull the Hero Slayer, but where Skull is focused more on very few but major upgrades, Metal Unit is about equipping your character with various weapons, rarities, and a persistent system. So the story is that we are fighting to save this planet inside our mech suits from what appears to be a very cute assortment of monsters, slimes, and so on. You're going to have to make use of varying weapons that come with different rarities, special abilities. At one point I got a Kamehameha blast, like right there. And your mission is to get through each area, kill every enemy on each floor, move on to the next. If you can beat the boss of a chapter, you unlock the next chapter of the game. If you run out of health, you go back to the base or your hub to then restart that chapter. And you'll go through the very similar looking environments to do so. It feels similar to Skull, though the rooms are handmade, but it's kind of presented in a shuffled order. So if you're hoping for some of the more complexity of kind of Spelunky or Biome of Isaac, it doesn't appear to be in Metal Unit. What the game does have is a variety of loot, and you'll find, buy, or craft loot as you explore the world. You'll get weapons that can be modified, you'll get stuff that can basically proc off of existing attacks, and you also have your dodge roll that you can also make use of. Live or die, you always return to the hub, where this is essentially the persistent element of the game. You can spend currency, the gold, that you acquire just by killing enemies, and that kind of gets preserved when you die, and the blue orbs that kind of represent the premium or the specialized currency, which is used to unlock passive perks, as well as doing more in the overall state of your character. Now, keep in mind that the version that we played of Metal Unit was in early access, and I don't know if features were missing because they weren't developed, or because of the fact that we didn't play the game long enough to unlock them. But there are hints at unlocking more persistent elements, upgrades, and essentially more ways again to power your character. Now, similar to Skull, the basic gameplay works, but I don't feel that there's enough persistence or variance at the moment to make it go the distance compared to some of our more favorite examples of roguelike and roguelite design. The world itself is very basic. While there are some random events or special things that can happen, it's not changing what you're doing in a moment-by-moment or moment-to-moment basis. Enemies and bosses tend to be a little bit damage spongy, and this is one of those games where it feels like you're in control until you get one bad spawn, all the enemies attack at the same time, and then you are dead. And the weapons themselves, while there is variety, it's still not changing what you're doing when you're fighting these enemies. And again, another problem that I have with this one, similar to Skull, is that you still have to kill every enemy in a level. So if one enemy kind of gets out of your view and you have to hunt them down, it just adds up to more time spent not really doing anything engaging. And I hope that over the early access, there will be more in terms of content and more in terms of subsystems, whether to make the game easier or harder or just more interesting, to keep the player coming back for more. But if you are looking for another action roguelite, and you enjoyed Skull, even due to how limited it was at the moment we were playing it, I would say give Metal Unit at least a check. Well, with that, let's move on. And we now turn our attention to the game Lumet. This was, I believe, a Game Jam title that proved to be popular enough to be turned into a full game. Our concept here is that this is a puzzle platformer. Our mission is to move through this world, kind of bringing back, I guess, the good light, that's the blue, and pushing back against the corruption, which is the red. And from a presentation standpoint, I do have to give credit to the developers that the entire game space itself is laid out in basically a single screen, or a no loading screens or no section, at least from what we saw. It gives a great way of kind of presenting the world and showing how far you've come and where you still have to go. But the general gameplay works like this. You can place down objects on various interaction points, and your overall mission is to get these kinds of pillars or crystals onto each one of these points in a section. When you do, it lights up the door and you move on to the next. Objects in the environment will interact differently based on what color they are and what color you put on them. So if I put a light crystal on a light platform like this, it will extend it. If I hit it with something that was red or corrupting, while it's light, it would recede. And a lot of the puzzle design is about manipulating these various colors and objects. Sometimes you have to corrupt something in order to get it to function, so that you can then move it to a spot where you can then purify it. And the game itself just basically goes through these kinds of puzzles. They do introduce more mechanics and elements, including lasers that can be used to corrupt or purify things at a distance, movable platforms, and other things. I played this for about 2 hours, give or take, both on and off stream. I did not see any enemy types introduced, or anything that can purposely kill or stop you. You can fall off the level, which in turn will leave you back at the previous checkpoint. And checkpoints occur at the start of each level or each room, as you can see here. The only issues I have with Lumet is that it does run into that same issue that a lot of puzzle-oriented games get. That it can become repetitive, performing or doing the same similar tasks with each room. If you're hoping for boss fights or special sections like that, you're not going to find it. And you're also going to have to spend a lot of time with some of the checkpoints. As the levels grow longer, you're going to have to, if you fail or you miss a jump or anything like that, you will have to restart the entire area. And again, for these earlier levels, it's not that bad, but in the later sections of the game, they do start to take up more real estate. Also, from a platforming standpoint, the jumping is, I would say, on the moderately difficult side. It's nowhere near as challenging as some of the more intensive versions of platforming, but if you're not good at platforming to begin with, the game does expect you to be able to make some, I guess, somewhat tricky jumps. Again, it's kind of hard to tell with the puzzles. Due to the fixed nature of how the switches work and the order, it does present things in essentially a specific order or a linear path to beat these puzzles. So I don't know if I was doing things in the right way, or if I was coming up with some unintentional skips for sections. But with that said, I really did enjoy Lumet. This was one of those games that was kind of a surprise when we saw it on one of our show, and I'm glad the developer was kind enough to get us a key to check this one out. If you're looking for another action puzzle or puzzle platformer game, especially one that it's going to be more like the zen or the flow side of things instead of being stressful, definitely give this one a check. But with that, let's move on. And we now turn our attention to the game Iris and the Giant. This is kind of like an emotionally driven roguelike, very similar to some extent to Slay the Spire, in that we are using deck building as our primary form of combat and interaction. The story is that we play as Iris here, who's apparently trapped in what appears to be her own personal hell, and she is suffering from depression. and her only way to get out is to reach the giant at the top of this realm. Standing in her way are all assortment of baddies, as well as limited resources. How the game works is that all the cards you get are consumed and then removed from your deck. If you run out of cards, it is game over. You get new cards by leveling up, finding them in treasure chests, and you can also unlock new things that can show up in subsequent runs, and we'll talk more about the persistence in a second. Each level of each room or floor is procedurally generated, and it works along this kind of row and column based format. When you kill an enemy in a column, in a row, the row moves up based on the number of things that you destroy. When enemies are essentially on the field, they will be active. Some enemies can perform tasks such as card stealing, card burn, etc. Some will come back to life. Some are immune to physical type cards. Some are immune to magic. And you get the general idea there. And your overall challenge of the game is, as you can see, enemies can attack you quite often. And you're going to have to constantly weigh how much to engage in a single floor of combat. Do you kill everything to earn a lot of experience, which in turn will allow you to level up? When you level up, you'll be able to boost certain aspects of your character. If you can kill the larger kind of quote-unquote boss enemies, you'll unlock a special perk that will remain with you until the end of that play. Now, when you die, as you can see right here, you return to the start, and there are several major forms of persistence. There are little novellas, or little vignettes that show Lily dealing with her depression, that when you find them, they act as persistent upgrade points that allow you to get unique passive buffs that remain active throughout each play. These passives can give you more card draw, they can give you a greater chance at reclaiming cards, and so on and so forth. You can also unlock imaginary friends, and the imaginary friends basically provide you with one unique passive buff that's kind of similar to the other system. It's kind of a way of allowing you to have more flexibility and guarantee upgrades when you start playing. And in order to unlock more of them, you'll have to complete specific challenges, like reach a certain floor without using a magic card, don't take as much damage, and so on and so forth. The one thing I really do like about Lily and the Giant, besides the aesthetics, is that there's a lot of variance that can occur during a run. You are constantly having to weigh, what cards do I have? What upgrades do I pick? If I can fight a massive enemy, what kind of unique buff do I get? And as with any good roguelike style game, there is definitely the potential for overpowered or game-breaking runs to occur. And you'll need them because the game tends to have some very spiky sections. And that takes me to kind of my main issue with it. One of the things that we see from a lot of deck building style roguelikes is that, as we all know, cards are very black and white in their usefulness and utility. And if you run into an enemy or an encounter that completely counters your cards, you are done. There is nothing you can do to get around that. And Lily here has a lot of opportunities for that to occur. Like I said, enemies can come with very special functions that if you do not have the cards, whether because they didn't show up for this playthrough or you use them at the wrong time, it will pretty much lead to a game over. And there's nothing you can really do, unfortunately, at that point if that occurs. During one part of our play, we ran into an enemy that is titled a Cerberus, that every time you kill him, he comes back to life. So your only way to defeat him is to be able to play multiple cards against him to basically destroy the body, or use a card that can move him around or move to the staircase. Here's the problem though. The cards that I had that allow me to play multiple cards per turn, I didn't have access to them. Likewise, I didn't have any movement-based cards. So when this occurred, there was literally nothing I could do to get around this fight. And that is not good from a roguelike perspective. The players should feel like they are the ones in charge of whether or not they win or lose. And here, this reminds me a lot of some of the annoyances of high-level Slay the Spire play. That you can get the perfect combination of cards and artifacts, but get that one encounter that completely counters you, and you're done. And there is a lot of that in this game. Also, the persistent elements are definitely in place to basically be required to have any chance at winning, which, as we've talked about before, is kind of a no-no when it comes to roguelike design. And that can be a bit frustrating for players who enjoy stuff like Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, and even games like Enter the Gungeon. Here, you need the passive benefits of your imaginary friends, as well as the upgraded perk elements, to have any chance at winning. From an aesthetical standpoint, I know a few people were complaining that the art felt a little jarring. And we had this discussion. I think we kind of felt that maybe some of the brighter or more standout colors kind of got in the way of some of the dull or kind of muted elements of it. But I'm curious, for those of you watching this, what do you think about the aesthetics? With that said, Lily and the Giant is not a game in early access, so I'm not sure what they're going to do going forward. But if you are a fan of these kinds of deck building style roguelikes, then I would give this one a solid look, but keep in mind the frustration points. And with that said, we're going to do our quick Game Wisdom supporter and sponsor shoutout now. And when we come back, we got one final game left for this part of the Indie Spotlight. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. For the final game of our spotlight, we turn to the title Boy and Box. This was submitted to me as the first game from a student, and if this really is the first title, there's definitely a lot here from a game design standpoint. While the presentation, especially with the title screen, may not be as strong as other games, the concept is quite ingenious. This is a platformer where you make the platform. Using the mouse, anywhere you click will move that box, and you can only have, at least from what I played, one box on the screen at a time. The game checkpoints when you move between rooms, and your overall objective is to collect those kinds of orbs that you see flying around and make it to the exit. And the game introduces new hazards and rules as you play through it, and I don't honestly know how long of a title it is. In these areas, you run into these vines that prevent you from creating any or moving your box around. Then there are enemies who will track you based on your position. And while the game definitely has kind of like a puzzle atmosphere to it, at the end of the day, this is very much a hardcore platformer. You're going to be required to make a lot of tricky jumps, and especially have some really good hand-eye coordination with moving with your left hand, and be able to set up blocks and such with your right. And the game definitely throws some very hard jumps at the player. And again, while this game looks like it's on the cutesy side, is probably a step below Kaizo titles in terms of the difficulty and skill required to win. And this is compounded by the fact that you're going to be constantly making motions and movements while you're trying to orient the block to get around them. And one of the issues I think this game has is just in terms of the marketability. The game, I know, probably doesn't have too many reviews at the moment. And if you're expecting this to be kind of a light-hearted title, the difficulty may put you off, especially if you're not used to Kaizo games and that kind of mechanical nature to it. Another point is that this game can be very hard on your hands for extended playthroughs because you're constantly having to adjust and maneuver this block around. And the later levels require you to move very quickly and perform very specific motions with both hands essentially. And similar to something like getting over it, this can become very painful or very annoying if you're trying to sit and play this game for an extended period of time. And I feel like the marketing of the game, or whatever they did not really help this title. Again, so much of this game is focused on hardcore platforming that I don't think people were expecting this by the Steam page or just by general discussions on it. But if you're looking for a very, and I do mean very challenging platform that's not like anything else you've played, Boy in Box definitely works along those lines. But I think that the skill level and just the hand-eye or manual dexterity required for this game may be even a little bit much for me, and it does, I feel, limit the audience for it. But, again, for this being the first title from the game, or from this developer, I think, there's a lot here in terms of very fine-tuned mechanics and design. And if this game works for you, then you're really going to have one that you enjoy. But again, I do not recommend this game for beginner levels, or even maybe moderate levels. This is definitely advanced design here. But with that said, we're going to wrap up this first look now. Thank you so much for the developers who submitted games. Once again, you'll find links to all the titles in the description down below. If you have a game you'd like me to take a look at for a future spotlight, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where I examine the art and science of games. We will be returning with part 3 very soon. But until then, take care. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.